Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Vedic Astrology podcast, both to listeners and viewers today. I have a super treat for all of you here. I have not one, but two great astrology teachers for his second visit, returning my teacher, Ryan Kurczak. Welcome, Ryan.
Hi, it's good to see you again, Fiona.
And for his very first time here, Ernst Wilhelm, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, and I'm really happy to meet you.
The context of our podcast today is that Ernst has gifted the community with a whole course on YouTube marking this very special time that we are passing through. It's called How to Have More Love in Your Life, and it is love on all levels, both partners, your work, the place you live, how you feel, just having more love. And it's a great resource for us as astrologers because we tend to find that this is one of the very popular topics that clients come to speak to us about. And maybe it's something they come to speak on several occasions. It's a really hot topic. And the course that's on YouTube, it's not necessarily exclusively for Vedic astrologers. It's really looking at a whole framework and philosophy for understanding love and for changing your actions and behaviors consciously to experience more love in your life. And that's why it's a really useful resource for us, because sometimes when you have seen a client once or twice or more about this topic, it lets you know that we might have to dig deeper than astrology or go beyond sometimes astrology. And this is where this course becomes a resource, not only for us, but for our clients as well, to understand love in a much bigger framework. So it's come about because we've got a current eclipse season. And the lunar eclipse was on the 19th of November, 2021. The solar eclipse was on the 4th of December. It's part of the Saros series 152, which incidentally, the last time this eclipse came around is when I started my relationship with my husband. So very dear to my heart. It's a 5 South eclipse if you follow in Bernadette Brady's book, The Eagle and the Lark. And it's an eclipse associated perhaps with happiness and with love. So all of this context was happening, and Ernst felt compelled to share this, give it to us all to have access to. And not only that, now Venus is retrograde. Mars is about to catch up and have this passionate conjunction with Venus. So it seems like the perfect time. Ernst, what has been your feeling about bringing this big project to fruition, publishing it? What's been the reaction? How are you feeling about this course now?
Well, this course was really a groundbreaking course for me. And while it's not about astrology, it's based on everything I've learned through the study of astrology. Astrology is really the perfect psychological model of how we actually operate and as human beings. Years and years in studying, years and years of living, it all came together for me. And it really answered, I think, the question for myself of why I started astrology in the first place. Because I started astrology because of I got into astrology. I became an astrologer as a result of my first girlfriend, which is a nice way of saying it didn't go well at all. And that is really what started this whole astrological quest and understanding. And through processing the relationship with astrology, I was able to heal from it very quickly. But, with Rahu in the 7th house, the path for me has really been about understanding relationships, understanding love. So I've done a lot of work from the beginning on, compatibility astrology and, behavioral astrology that affects relationships. It's always been really the thing that's been on the top of my to-do list when it came to studying astrology. So now, literally 30 years later, my Saturn return of becoming an astrologer was happening right now, basically, during this class. So 29 point some years later, here I am having the last of 5 Pluto-Venus squares, right? And a month before the eclipse, I'm having this last of 5 Pluto-Venus hits of the last 2 years. And shortly before that, this concept of Yogananda, that all love is based on utility, kind of popped into my head, and it made sense to me for the first time. When I first heard that, when I was probably 20 years old, before I'd even had a girlfriend, I thought this idea that love is based on utility and usefulness was really self-centered, and I just didn't buy into it. But then a few weeks, couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks before my last Pluto-Venus square, it just hit me that, yeah, no shit, I should have listened, saved myself a lot of trouble. And so with that little thought, my mind just went into overtime, where for the next 6 weeks, I hardly slept. This course started coming through me, and all this understanding that I'd really been working for. It's like all the work, all the study, everything I thought about and studied on relationships and astrology relevant to relationships kind of crystallized into the first rendition of this course. And I literally was wired. I was hardly sleeping. I was going all day long. I was thinking about it, making connections all day long. It just all came together. And then, all came together also in conjunction with that eclipse, which also landed on one of my planets. And so I got to benefit from that eclipse as well. And part of this was the course. And this course was so important for me to do personally, for me to understand all this stuff, for all this stuff to finally figure out that when I got done, I was like, wow, I could die in peace now. That was the feeling I got. It wasn't, oh, now I can make my love life work better and I'll have more love in my life. It wasn't even that. It was like, wow, I figured out a huge thing that I came here to figure out. I'm ready to go. If I need to go, I'm cool. It was it was that level of a relief to get the picture of how relationships actually work. And so basically that's what the course is about. It's really about how relationships work, how we constantly are having opportunities for love. There's different types of love, but we're constantly having opportunities for love. And if we understand those opportunities right away, we're seeing that we have more than we thought we did. I do relate things to astrology, like there's different types of love. There's sustainable, committable love, which is a Venusian love. There's hard love, which is a Mars love. And then there's charitable love, which is a Jupiter love. And then there's the love 'em and leave 'em, which is a Saturn love. So every planet really has a quality of love to it. And we're always using one planet, if not the other. So if we can use those planets wisely and as they're intended to, then we're always having love in our lives, even if that planet we're using at the time is Saturn. So that's kind of the background of it, of how it all came about.
One can see that in some of the videos I've been watching of the course. Sometimes you sigh, Ernst, with like relief of being able to communicate. It's like this weight is lifted, or it's like you're running a marathon and you finished a particular stage. So it really, what you're saying about being proud of this legacy, creating a piece of work that you're at peace, that describes all you've been bringing together, I think comes across in the videos as you transmit them, that it's really coming through you.
Yeah, it was a real personal experience, this whole course. I mean, it's been a long journey of really 30 years, 29 years when Saturn returned, It was really accumulation of a 29 point some year journey. Yeah. And definitely I could feel like, okay, I resolved something. I completed a chapter. Yeah. It's gone to chapter, whatever, next chapter of my astrological life.
And you share a lot of your personal stories through the course as well.
Yeah. I embarrassed myself over and over and over again.
And is that something that you usually do, or is it this material and the significance of this work to you that drew that personal response?
I've been doing more of that, sharing my own life, because I always had this complex called perfection complex, I always felt I had to be perfect. And needless to say, that did cause me some major problems in my relationships. But I always had this feeling that I had to be perfect or else, And so everyone's watching me, so I better be perfect type feeling. If I make a mistake, I'm going to get shot. That was the feeling I've kind of had throughout my life. And what I learned is that there's only one good example in this world, and I think there was a part of me that thought I had to be an example, therefore I had to be perfect. But now I realize that there's only one useful example in this world, and that's the example of somebody who screws up a lot but finds a way to be happy anyway. So in telling stories about myself, I'm just telling the honest truth of my hurdles, my mistakes, my traumas, basically all the shit that is wrong with me. And it's nothing to hamper being happy. It's nothing to hamper finding love. It's nothing to hamper spiritual realization. And I think that, people are always looking up to people, trying to find a perfect role model or a perfect being. And we're not supposed to be that. We're just supposed to be happy beings with all of our imperfections. So I'm letting the belly fat hang out more than I used to. And, saying, hey, I'm not perfect, but I feel pretty happy. And that's my goal, is happiness, not perfection. And I think that's the goal we all have. Perfection's not possible in this world. Even Lord Rama did an evil thing. Even Christ did an evil thing. Everyone does one wrong thing, at least, even those saints and enlightened beings. Perfection is not an achievable thing, I've learned. But being happy is being happy with our imperfections and not letting our problems and mistakes and troubles hold us back from moving forward to greater happiness and really greater love too. So that's why I tell more embarrassing stories about myself than I used to.
Well, it's beautiful.
For someone who hasn't listened to your course yet, how would you tell them to put the course into practice?
Okay, that's the thing. This course is so practical. And Ryan knows me. He knows me. I'm like the most impractical person on earth. I do crazy things every day. And but this course is really practical. It's really something you can implement because it's all based on, seeing what's useful. Love is what's useful. And if you can see what's useful in a situation, the useful thing that can be done. Well, first, if you can see what's useful in a situation, then you can see the love that's in the situation. If you can see what can be done to make a situation useful, you could turn that situation into a loving situation. It's very nuts and bolts practical. It's very logical. It's very practical. There's nothing there to make you confused or doubt it. It's nuts and bolts. This is how it works. This is how we work. This is what's important to all of us. The only thing that gets in the way is that we have psyches that oftentimes drive us towards doing things that aren't impractical, to get into relationships that offer nothing. That's a very impractical thing to do, isn't it? But people are doing it all the time. So it's just extremely practical.
Is it hard though?
It's easy to do. The hard thing is to get out of our own way, because the biggest hurdle, the first hurdle, is that people have definitions of love that they're operating on. Everyone says, I want love. And I can close my eyes, throw their charts away and say, you have the love you believe in. Because we're all walking around with a skewed definition of love. And the more traumatized a person, the more difficult their life has been, the more abuse they've suffered, if they've suffered sexual abuse or not, depending on basically the abuse they've suffered, that abuse has defined their definition of love. And they run around saying, I'm going to go get love. And then they go run right to that definition every time. And they get hurt every time. So one of the things I do in the course, I spend a whole video defining what love is, because many, many of us are in the need of defining what love actually is. And so we have to change our belief system, our understanding of what love is, from a definition that really just leads to pain and suffering and more feelings of inadequacy and lack of self-worth, to a definition that allows us to have a forward motion in our life, a productive life, a good life, a happy life, and a life that's filled with usefulness and purpose. So that's the first hard thing for people to do. And even once people understand that there's a healthy definition of love that they can pursue, there's still going to be a tendency for a while for that unhealthy definition to want to say, oh, this is what love is to me.
So is that healthy definition different for everybody, or is there a one healthy definition?
There's one healthy definition as per Yogananda. All love is based on utility. It's useful. And then you have to understand on what level it's useful, because it could be useful materially, emotionally, or spiritually. And where it's useful will help define the best structure of a relationship for any two people to have.
So you would have to look at each of their charts to figure out where it is useful, or do they already know this?
You just ask them. I mean, you could try to work it out from the charts, but it's like, how tall are you? It's easier to get a tape measure than to predict that, right?
Right.
It's easier. It's easier just to ask them. You just say, what's useful about this person in your life? It's like just say, how are they materially useful? How are they emotionally useful? And usefulness means it supports you in who you are. It supports you in where you're going, and it supports who you really are. It doesn't support your ego, doesn't support your bullshit, doesn't support your escapes. It supports really where your true self wants to take you.
Well, in the course, do you touch upon, so once you have that information, do you touch upon how to see through your own blind spots to actually work with that?
Yeah, I have 4 principles. They're called the 4 hard things. And these are the things that we have to do to cut through the bullshit to keep us from pursuing love that's not love. So I have a video on each of these hard things that we have to do.
Which one's the hardest?
Which one's the hardest?
Yeah.
It's different things are harder for different people, but one of the hard things that's very, very hard is that people need to recognize that they have the right to be happy. Mm-hmm. That's actually, they have a right to actually do what they can to be happy. See, a lot of people grow up feeling that they actually don't have the right to be happy. They don't have the right to discover their purpose. And if we approach a relationship with the idea that I don't even have the right to pursue happiness. In fact, even in the Constitution, the Bill of the Bill of Independence of the 1776 of the Constitution, that actually took the time to write that every human being has the unalienable right to, liberty and the pursuit of happiness. It's kind of shocking that would have to be written down. And of course, they wrote it down because there was tyranny on earth at the time. But really, even in our personal lives and our personal families and the families we grow up, this liberty to pursue happiness has been taken away from many, many people. So there's many, many people walking around believing that deep down inside that they don't even have the right to be happy. So they won't take the steps to be happy. They won't walk to the relationship that gives happiness. They'll stay where they're suffering. And so that's one of the hard things, is to really commit to that. And I see people when I'll talk to them, and when they recognize that they have the right to be happy, I mean, they're like crying. They're like gushing tears, because this concept is like, whoa, it's like there's a lot of emotional release, because a lot of people are walking around without this idea that they even have the remotest right to be happy, to pursue happiness.
Do you touch upon the extreme nature of that, in that some people would think, well, if I have a right to be happy, therefore I don't need to worry about these responsibilities I actually do have? Is there a balance between recognizing being in a relationship, there is some level of possible responsibility there, rather than just following whatever your mind tells you is going to make you happy? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, well, luckily the Constitution said we have the right to pursue happiness. It didn't say we have the right to be selfish.
Okay. Right.
And those are 2 very different things. For an unselfish person to be happy, which means most of the population, unless they're sociopaths, basically, whatever that percentage of population is, 2-3% or something, unless the person has sociopathic qualities, they're just not going to be able to be happy if the people in their lives are suffering. That's a natural human quality. How can I be happy if my children aren't happy, if my wife isn't happy, if my ex-wife isn't happy, if my brother isn't happy? How can I be happy, So there is a balance about that. And there's also the balance of understanding, when I pursue my right to have happiness, how is it impacting others? And see, the beauty of the world is the synchronicity of life. When we're living unconsciously and we're following our patterns of being a broken person who suffered abuse and trauma and has a skewed definition of love, when we're following those patterns, people have relationships and there's always going to be conflict. There's always going to be problems. Nothing that's going on in those relationships is really supporting the people's growth. And ultimately, the most useful thing is what supports our personal and spiritual growth, what turns us to a better version of ourselves. But when people are working out of their unconscious patterns, when they do get together and get along, they're usually actually getting along because they're not threatening each other's patterns. Their patterns are like harmonizing. So say you get a controlling person who always knows what they want with a lost person who's very dependent. These people can get along for a very, very long time because one person's happy to have the other one be their boss and the other one's happy to lead, right? So there's this quality of like, okay. But if these are limiting patterns of the way that people are being, and if it really doesn't allow them to progress with who they really are, it's not a useful relationship in any way. It's not love.
You're saying that could work, but it could be limiting. So are you saying that might not be a limiting thing if that's just what the people...
Ultimately, whenever there's a pattern, at the end of the day, you're not fulfilled, you're not happy.
Okay. So if you're consciously happy being of service, then that's okay.
Yes. And you could tell because it's the end. Are you feeling, are you feeling safe or are you feeling happy? When we follow our patterns, when life lets us follow our patterns, we feel kind of safe because that's the paradigm that we've learned to operate under. It doesn't feel threatening, but it certainly does not feel fulfilling.
That's good. And I guess my curiosity is, having been involved in counseling for quite a while, just in general, like you, I've been interested in Kriya Yoga and meditation, and I've done all of that stuff. But it wasn't until I was actually working with someone else who could kind of see those blind spots and really challenge those areas that I could not even, I was so amazed that I could not even see those things. It makes it seem like it could be a very hard thing to do on one's own.
It does. And we need human relationships to iron out our wrinkles and to, show us a reflection of what we need to learn in ourselves. That's one of the important parts of relationships. Different people have more of a need to do that with the partner than other people, depending on what their personal path is. But all of us as humans, to some degree, have a lot of lessons to learn, a lot of things to learn that we're only going to learn about ourselves when we encounter another person. The person that I call the most important person in our life, okay? Now, the most important person in our life growing up is our parents, but we eventually trade them in for our spouse or our girlfriend, and then that becomes the most important person in our life. And we have a very different relationship with that person than anyone else, and that person, the slightest wrong move on their part can deeply hurt us, and through that show us where we have to grow still. And I talk about a lot of that in the course. So, the point we started talking about 2 minutes ago, the beautiful thing about the harmony of life is that there's always a harmony. So if two people in a relationship of a codependent type that allows their patterns to mutually exist in an unfulfilling way, okay? At one point, a person says, I need to go pursue happiness. And they start pursuing happiness. While it'll hurt the other person who's in that pattern, it also gives that other person the opportunity to break out of their pattern and pursue a deeper happiness too. And so that's why in relationships, there's always a time, because really most relationships start with codependent patterns of some type until the Rahu Ketu maturations happen, when we really start breaking through all this stuff. At that point, that's when most marriages fail. That's when most relationships fail. That's also where some relationships go through a tremendous amount of turbulence and change and come out actually in a better relationship than they entered it. But it's always very painful. And then because as one person starts to break out of their pattern and pursuing happiness, it forces the other person to break out of their pattern. And that's useful, though. That's actually more loving than being nice and staying in that stuck pattern with somebody. And that's another kind of love. That's hard love. So there's a synchronicity. If somebody's actually doing a loving act for themselves and not a selfish act, but an actually loving act of growth and maturing, it's also going to support the other person to have an equally loving act if they choose to. Sometimes people don't choose to, but if they choose to, the opportunity is there for them.
Right.
So even in situations like that, there's room for true love. There's room for true care. Even when somebody else is getting hurt by the pursuit of another person's happiness. But it's not that selfish happiness. And I didn't talk about this during the course, but I think one really important thing that's really helpful for people to understand is that the nature of selfishness, because that's what we're asking, is the person being selfish. In my opinion, how I see selfishness is that selfishness is when you treat someone in a way and you expect to be treated differently. So if I decide to be a highwayman and I go down and I rob people and I kill them, I leave their bodies dead on the side of the street, when the authorities catch me and string me up, if I'm good with it, I'm not selfish. Okay? If I'm killing those people and robbing their money and they're like, please don't kill me, and I kill them, And then when the authorities catch me, they string me up. And I'm like, all right, you got me. Go ahead, string me up. There's nothing selfish about me. But if when the authorities catch me, I go, no, please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. That's selfish. You see, I'm expected to be treated differently. If I rob some people and they kill me and someone robs me and kills me, if I take it like a man, I'm not being selfish. But if I beg for mercy, oh, don't do that. I'll be good. That's selfish. So that's an extreme example. But you see in our relationships, people will insist we treat them a certain way and turn right around and treat us the opposite way.
But what you're describing to me sounds kind of Saturnine.
That's an extreme example.
Yeah, but no, I'm not talking about the violence part. I mean, the reality of knowing, well, this is going to be the consequences of my actions, so therefore I'm going to accept it. Is that a Saturnine kind of quality?
No, it's just an honest quality. If like, I know a woman, she's an old cranky woman, and she cannot say 2 sentences to me without insulting me. And I love this old woman, you know? The reason I love her, couldn't believe the bond I formed with her, is because she does not expect to be treated any better than that.
I see.
So when it's like, and I'm like, I miss the old lady, you know? It's like, gosh. And I mean, I try to figure out ways to say something nice that she could no way in the world find a way to be mean to me or say it crude or say something that's not nice. I have not done it. So I can't think of I even say something. I can say, you have a beautiful dress on, old lady. And she'll find a way to turn around and make me, you know, to throw a dart in me, you know. But she does not be expected to be treated any differently. She's one of the most giving people I've ever met. She's one of the most serviceful people I've ever met. So what if she's grumpy? She doesn't expect anyone else to treat her from any other point of view. There's nothing selfish about that woman, you know. At the same time, I know there's people that if you drop a feather on their foot, they'll complain about being hurt, and then they'll turn around and drop a brick on your foot, you know, and you know, and then and you're like, and don't even notice that your foot's broken.
Yeah.
So my definition of selfishness is is when somebody doesn't expect someone to treat them differently than they are, because then they're given the same for same. They're good with that. Mm-hmm. And yes, ideally, we don't want to be giving grumpy comments to someone as, you know, as our way. But if that's all a person can do, and if they don't expect preferential treatment or different treatment than that, I find these people really easy to love.
Yeah. Well, in this course, you previously, and you probably still have them, the reports that show a person's capacity for love and relationship. Mm-hmm. So in this course, do you go into, is this more about focusing on how you become ready for a relationship first?
Yeah, this course is about how love actually works.
Okay.
A definition of working love instead of following our definitions of love that's not a working definition, you know. The things that get in the way of pursuing that definition, ways we can heal the things that get in the way, like, you know, proper astrological counseling through the Lajjitaadi Avasthas and things like that. Learning about our Rahu and Ketus. And then really understanding the different types of love. So right away, we can recognize the love we already have. You know, when we understand that there's many kinds of love. There's hard love, there's charitable love, and there's two-way street sustainable love. And then there's love them and leave them. So there's these 4 types of love, and they're all supported by the different planets. And then to give one of those loves, to have that love, you have to be able to give it. So to have material love on this, okay, sustainable love is when it's a two-way street and it feels good. Because we're not designed to sustain things that don't feel good. It's like we can go to the dentist, we have a bad tooth and it hurts to go there, but we can't go to the dentist every day. Same with love. We can go to love when we need to get a tooth pulled, and that's love. But it's not sustainable love because it doesn't feel good. So sustainable love is useful. It feels good to both people. It's a two-way street. That's the Venus love. Okay. Now to give that kind of love, you have to have the commodity. So a lot of the course is about having the commodity. If you want a material love, which means you're useful to each other on a material level, you have to have some material commodities. You have to have money. You have to have material skills. You have to have physical skills that you can trade for the same from the other person somehow. And then they want to have someone that they can make him materially be useful for, so they can buy a house together and share the bills. They want someone materially useful so that when they go camping or go on a trip, they have another physical presence to support them. So these are all like just basic materially useful things. Those are wonderful things to have. And any relationship needs to have some materially useful stuff, especially in the context of building their material lives together. Okay. Now, in the same way, we want to have an emotionally useful relationship. And just like a materially useful relationship helps people or supports people on a material level, an emotionally useful relationship is going to support people on an emotional level.
And so is the emotional level with the moon then?
The emotional level, of course, it has to do with the moon, but we don't even have to look at it that way. We just have to say, do you feel emotionally supported? Do you feel cared for? Do you feel emotionally validated? And you know when someone's emotionally useful for you because your feelings want to go there. The part of you that feels just wants to spend time with them. It's a subtle thing. It's easy to see if someone's materially useful because you're like building abundance on some level, okay? Or you're getting something desired on a physical level. But emotional usefulness we discover because we find ourselves just drawn to that. Because our emotions will be drawn to what's comforting to them and useful to them and feels good to them. And they'll be repelled from the opposite.
Okay. But how do you tell the difference between when someone has an emotional need that is actually more of like a psychological problem that they've just become accustomed to or addicted to?
It's real easy because when they're there emotionally, it just doesn't feel good. They'll be going, gosh, I'm spending all this time with this person. It doesn't even feel good to be there. But I keep going there. Why am I going there? Well, that's because you got some kind of psychological addiction to suffer the experiences of that person.
Well, what if there's that codependent thing where you're with someone that you're codependent with that you just feel so good, but it's actually hindering you?
It's not the same. It's not feeling right. You'll go there because of something in your mind. It won't be just the purity of your heart pulling there. But you see, the problem is our mind is constantly overriding our emotions. And when we have a pattern or we have a codependent way of being, there's a part of us that just feels, I have to go back to this person. But then there's a part of us that's going, it doesn't even feel that good to be there, but we don't listen to that. And the part that overdrives says, I got to go do this with that person for whatever reason.
Okay. I guess I'm having a hard time with that because, some people, when you have this whole codependent thing, they want to get back to that person because then it feels good. But according to you, you're kind of saying that if there is that feeling of fulfillment.
If they think it feels good, but that's like taking a hit of cocaine. It is the very same thing. It's a drug because literally what happens is we're addicted to different hormones in our system based on our experiences growing up. So we're seeking out experiences that will allow us, the little drug dealer inside of us, to drop that hormone. So if we're addicted to adrenaline, we're going to be drawn to people that will allow us to have adrenaline drops. And so we are literally, and I talk about this in the course, we're all literally, if we have an experience of love growing up that's really not love, we are actually recovering addicts on a chemical level, on a physical and chemical level.
Right.
But just like the junkie knows there's a part of him that doesn't feel right, there's also a part of us that doesn't feel right. And we have to look at it and analyze it. Mm-hmm. One of the things I talk about in the course is sit down with your partner, sit down with yourself, analyze your relationship, observe it. Where is it useful? On an emotional level, people are useful to each other when they grow into emotionally healthier beings.
Right.
If they're still responding and reacting to the same things on an emotional level with disappointment and unhappiness, they're not making emotional growth. If there's not acceptance, like true acceptance and care coming from their partner, and if they can't give true acceptance and care to their partner, there's not going to be any room for emotional healing. Because emotional healing doesn't take place with a person without those two ingredients.
Right.
If those two ingredients aren't present, a person has to withdraw from their relationship to have emotional healing. And at that point, it's not a partnership on an emotional level.
Let's take an example since you mentioned the Lajjitaadi Avasthas. So One of my favorite and most frustrating ones to try to talk to people about is Venus getting starved by the moon.
Yeah.
So when someone has that kind of pattern going on, with what you're kind of teaching in this course, what could they learn or understand about that would help them move beyond that difficulty?
Venus starving the moon's an interesting one because Venus starving the moon could just be such kind and sweet people in a way. They just feel so relationship centered, but it's the way they're coming at it. Okay, so the moon's job is basically to adapt us to what allows so that life will drop on our laps what we need. It's really an adapting planet. And it's a planet that says, okay, I need this. What can I do different? How can I be different? What can I do better to get that? That's what the moon's for. Okay. But when the moon's aspecting Venus, Venus is an outside planet. It's like, oh, there's something good over there. And the moon goes, I need that thing. Let me figure out a way to get that thing without changing who I am, without doing anything different on a core level. Sure, doing something different on a superficial level, like put a sexy dress on maybe. But I'm talking about doing something on a core level in the context of who the person is, or to do something on a core level that makes them better. And so they will want to get more from others, but it'll never be enough. Mm-hmm. So the problem you have with Moon Venus is like, while the people are really relationship centered, there's never enough, and it's until they heal that Avasthas, and it's easy for them to be, to be unpleased. It's easy for them to be disappointed because the expectation is too great. That the reality of just the simple realities of life usually make them create situations where they feel unloved. So they go from being really relationship centered to all of a sudden something can make them feel unloved in a very quick way, simply because their expectation is so great. So they need to recognize that, that focusing on getting needs from others, expecting others to fulfill any need doesn't work. They have to become the thing, and then it works. So it's a tricky Avasthas. It's a very romantic Avasthas. You can call it a hopeless romantic Avasthas if you wanted to, But so people with that Avasthas, they need to get a real reality check on what can actually be realistically expected from love. Their ideas of love, of what love can offer, are greater than what it can offer, basically.
Right. And so what kind of when you talk about healing that Avasthas, you gave some indication, but what would be an example or an idea that this person might have to undergo or accept or do to work with that?
There's such a focus on this idea that, yes, the world can give me something that is going to change me ultimately into a happier person. And they need to shift that idea to recognizing that only they can turn themselves into a happy person. And that what the relationship gives is a reflection of that. If they can grasp that idea, then they can start acting out of that idea, because we always have a choice in what we can do. We can make a choice that's going to make a difference in our life, or we can make a choice that's just going to set us up for a disappointment. So if a person has this belief of moon starving Venus, that there's something out there that's special enough and good enough that it's going to make a difference to me as a person, as an individual, to how I am, to who I am, like make a critical difference, they're going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. And a simple way of saying that, if they think there's something out there that can make them ecstatically happy, they're going to be disappointed. Or ecstatically fulfilled, they're going to be disappointed. But if they recognize that, but with that belief, if they have that belief, they're going to pursue that. And they'll forget everything in the face of love. Right. Nothing else matters because I have a chance for love. They'll forget everything. And that's not necessarily a healthy decision. If they recognize that for their life to be more fulfilled, they have to develop themselves, and they recognize that, then they will continue to develop themselves and not get lost in the romantic, the romantic pit, I guess I'll call it.
Yeah. Well, I don't have this because my chart, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is one of those Avasthas that I would see it and people would describe what's going on in their life, and it's there in their chart, plain as day. And you try to point out what you're describing, and there's always this that's not right. I don't do that at all. That's not the way it is. Do you have that experience too when people have this Avashta? I mean, it seems like there's a lot of self-denial in this one for some reason.
Yeah, all the Avashtas, all troubled Avashtas have an element we don't want to understand.
Okay.
And with the moon star Venus, the element people don't want to understand is there's a dependent quality about them. And they get really, really hurt when their need for dependence does not get met. And they'll make themselves dependent. What I mean by make themselves dependent is that they will somehow hook their happiness or well-being onto another person.
Right.
And the minute we do that, we are going to get disappointed, because really all that's dependent on us. That's something, once we develop it, we share it with someone else. And if we share it with someone else who has developed it, then we have a two-way street of love.
Right.
Otherwise, there's just a one-way street of love. And ultimately, it has to be two-way.
But what makes the difference in the awareness of, say, the moon starving Venus and, say, moon starving Saturn? Because when I see moon starving Saturn, I can say, there will always be this issue, and you're never going to feel like you have enough emotional contentment. There will always be something to prevent you from getting the emotional contentment. I can say that to people, and they'll say, "Well, yeah, I get that." So why is there a difference in awareness in these two?
Moon starving Saturn is so easy. You can just say, you're always attracted or drawn to something that's not yours. That won't work. That doesn't fulfill you. And they'll go, yeah, that always happens. It's real clear, because
so it's more obvious.
It doesn't give anything. It's limited. It's stuck.
Right.
And so it becomes real evident that that's happening. And they might even feel like life is against them, because the thing that's always going to make them happy is unattainable somehow, right?
Right.
Or not working even though it should. With the moon Venus, I think it's so hard to grasp because we're all so romantically programmed. So not only do we have these experiences growing up that set that Avashta, our whole culture romantically programs us into believing the moon Venus ideology is a true ideology.
There's a whole realm of cinema just living off that storyline, isn't there?
Oh yeah, and the trees they print onto for that. Yeah, the books they write.
There's a few other things in the course to link to Ryan's question there, and I think one of them is where you almost start out with the course is quite confronting, perhaps, with someone that has Moon Venus combination, because we talk about love as being utility, and that's a little bit shock for that. Beautiful rainbow unicorn view that love is going to sweep you up and swallow you, and it's going to be warm and everything will be okay.
Yeah.
Then maybe where I want to dig a little bit deeper, and Ryan's kind of picking at it without realizing quite the question, is that there are some beautiful planetary combinations that you're talking about in this course. And for the sustainable love, we've been talking about Venus. Ryan's picked up on that. But the partner planet for sustainable love is the sun. These two, what we sometimes think of as mutual enemies in Vedic astrology. But so what I think is helpful for this Avashta is where you go to in the course around one must know oneself and know one's calling and know one's glow, one's brightness, one's center first. And you make this point about sun maturing at 21, Venus maturing at 25, like it's written down, guys, sun first, Venus second. But in terms of sustainable love, to achieve sustainable love, that sun Venus conversation or relationship is vital to resolve them.
Yeah. So basically, committable, sustainable love is the Venus love. I'm just going to reiterate this for people. I know you know this. And that sustainable love is a two-way street that offers something of value to each person, and it feels good too. But we can't do that without a commodity. So every type of love we may have, we have to have that love to give. If we don't have it to give, we can't have it as a two-way street, right? And the foundation for that is the sun, which is basically knowing who we are. If we don't know who we are, how can we even know what's useful for us, right? We can't. And so we simply can't have committable, sustainable love until we know who we are, what we're here for, what's important for us to do. We can't just marry because there's a feeling of love. There's a hormone of love. There's a chemical of love. We can't marry out. We can't involve ourselves with people because of biology, basically, We have to, that's not committable and sustainable. That just results in, almost 50% of the women in America being single moms. And we need to know who we are first, which is the sun. And that gives us the basic foundation of knowing what we have to offer another person and what we need from another person. So It's real simple, real practical. And on every type of love, we have to have, like most people are concerned about simply emotional love. They want to have an emotional commitment, an emotional relationship, an emotional connection. But unless we can emotionally find our own joy, unless we can emotionally be happy, we have nothing to offer another person on an emotional level. But the problem is people think that they can be empty, unhappy, unjoyful people and love will find them and everything will be okay. It doesn't work that way. Love might find them and make everything will be okay, but the person giving that love will not be able to sustain it if they're not getting the same back. And if a person doesn't have that, they can't find their own joy. They can't feel good within themselves. If they don't have warmth and joy and happiness within themselves, then they have nothing on an emotional level to offer anybody else. And so the commodity in order to have a sustainable emotional relationship, people have to be able to sustain themselves emotionally so that they have something to share with their partners.
But are these really astrological issues, or are these just common sense? We should have had the culture. We should have been born into a different culture where these things were actually important kind of issues. Yeah,
we should. If we were in such a retarded culture, we should know this stuff. We should be seeing this growing up. But unfortunately, these are not the cultures that are on Earth at this time. We're working towards those one little step at a time. And yes, you can look at the chart. You can see those. If a person has a troubled moon, if the moon is starving lots of planets, then no, these people do not know how to be emotionally, giving to themselves. Their emotional relationship with themselves is skewed, and therefore they won't have a good emotional relationship with others. If their moon's in good avasthas, if their moon is causing good avasthas, they will be able to have an emotional commodity to give to others because they're giving it to themselves. They have it.
So what you're saying is that this course that you have been sharing is really a gift of the Dwapara Yuga to help get us further on into the yugas.
I hope that everything we're doing as astrologers and psychologists and healers is getting us deeper into the Dwapara Yuga and out of the residues of the Dark Ages. But, that's a 2,000 some year process. So we're just getting the ball rolling. But the important thing is we make it a snowball.
But I think you're capturing some of the scale there, Ryan. This is a big course.
Yeah.
It's like 16, 18 videos long. It's a huge course. It could be a big 300-page book. There's a lot to it. A lot of people have been helped by the course. I've had more positive comments on this course than anything else I've taught, as far as people going, that's exactly what I needed to hear. I totally understand this now. This has helped me change my life. I do really consider it a life-changing course, and a course that, while I do talk about astrology, because I'm incapable of not talking about astrology during the course, you don't need to know anything about astrology to benefit 100% from the course. You were mentioning that this course is really huge, and I was replying that, a person can build a counseling practice just around the information in this course. I mean, it is a complete course. There's a lot to it, and it leads to a lot of other possibilities of exploring healing methods and as well.
Yep.
Maybe you should include this part. But my question to you, Ernst, is, one of the things I've always noticed is we get all these astrologers and they learn all of this stuff, but they don't necessarily have the counseling skills to really, like, having the knowledge doesn't necessarily mean that it's automatically going to heal these things, right?
No, not at all. There's a big difference between a person having an intellectual understanding something and having embodied it where they can be a healing force in other people's lives.
Right.
And, I've also seen when astrologers, they understand something on a mental level, they understand something intellectually, but they haven't grasped it in themselves. that they always run into roadblocks with working with people because, we have to, every person's so unique that we just can't approach them with a rigid intellectual model. We have to respond to their very unique need. And we only can do that when we respond out of our hearts. And so unless our cells understand what's going on, we can't respond out of our hearts. We'll just respond out of our minds. And there's nothing we do out of our mind is necessarily going to be the correct thing for another person. We have to respond out of our deeper intelligence. And so, like anything else, like martial arts or whatever, until we've learned it to a degree where we have a bodily realization of it, where it's in ourselves, we really can't use it. And so astrologers just need to contemplate whatever they learn very, very deeply. And I think that's the reason a lot of the old books made learning astrology so difficult. They wanted people to contemplate, and make it their own. And it's really important every astrologer takes what they learn, makes it their own, and embodies it so they can actually heal with it. Because that gives them the wisdom to draw the right thing out when they're working with the person, to say the right thing. And sometimes saying the right thing is a bad joke, Sometimes that a bad joke can shifts a person's perspective to get in the, aha, I get it. You never know what it's going to be, but you can't just follow rigid principles on an intellectual level.
I feel that this is one of the things, Ernst, that you are offering for astrologers, is that we can refer clients to this course, because it's hard in a 1 hour session with someone to answer the question, how am I going to get more love in my life? Which is often the question the client has come to you for, right? And you might talk about the seventh lord, and you might talk about a debilitated Jupiter, and you've scratched the surface of something. You've looked at some Avasthas and something. It's been helpful. It's good. But what this course is offering, and what Ryan was just saying, sometimes the astrologer doesn't have the counselling skills. They have the astrology skills, not the counselling skills, but they also don't have the time and the scope to say, okay, if you want to answer that question, can you book in for the next 18 hours? So let's work out that. Whereas this is something that we can refer clients to because they're open to astrology. That's why they've come to me as an astrologer. And I've already started doing that. It's something that people can then watch at their own pace, examine, come back to their astrologer with questions. It's a way to break out of the limits of that 1 hour reading format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really not possible for an astrologer to educate a person on what love is, to really re-educate a person after a lifetime of miseducation on love. Astrologer doesn't have the time for that. People can't afford that. Where we need the astrologer, and why I am looking for astrologers who are good with the Avasthas and things, is simply to help the person unlock the key to why they're not able to fulfill the process. Because, like I said, there's the 4 hard things, the things that get in the way of us of actually choosing love that works. And the astrologer can see that in the chart easily. They can find the most difficult Avasthas. They can talk to them about healing that Avasthas. They can explain what that Avasthas is doing to them, how it's getting in the way. And that's where the astrologer is going to excel more than any other professional. It could take a counselor 6 months to figure that out. But the astrologer is going to glance at the chart and say, oh, it's your Mars, it's your Jupiter, it's your sun. And right away say, look, just focus on this planet over and over again until you get it. There's generally one planet that's causing most of the problems in a person's life, one bad Avasthas. And if the person can get on top of that Avasthas, their lives will really start changing. And that's what we need the astrologers for. And that's why in the course I do say, either take the Lajjitaadi Avasthas course or find an astrologer who can talk to you about your Lajjitaadi Avasthas, because that's ultimately the limiting factor in ourselves that we have to resolve.
Deep.
Yeah. Here we are, an hour into our conversation, and still with plenty of things to discuss. I'm wondering, rather than planning to get together again, could we put a pause in this conversation so our listeners and viewers can draw breath and go and refresh themselves? But would you guys be willing to keep going, keep exploring this profound, useful topic of how to have more love in your life?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think we could do that together.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I will see you the next time that we get together.